Hi everyone, and welcome to the Nikhil Hogan Show. I'm very happy to introduce my guest today, pianist, composer, teacher, and music scholar, Nicole DiPaolo. She is an online adjunct lecturer in music at Indiana University, a faculty member at a Cleveland area multi-teacher music studio, the principal theory teacher at Liberty Park Music, an online-only video subscription-based music school, and a very much sought-after online instructor of piano, music theory, and composition. I will add a very respected member of the Partimento community, so if you want to learn Partimento, my friends, this is someone you can reach out to for online lessons. Nicole, welcome to the Nikhil Hogan Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'd love to know about your musical background. How did you get started, and what led you to where you are today?
Well, I got the idea in my head at some point when I was a preschooler or something like that, that I wanted to study the piano, and I have no idea where I got this idea because my parents are not really musicians. And so when I entered kindergarten, we had a girl in my class whose mother was a teacher in the area, and so we just signed right up with her. And I don't think my parents would have been able to find a teacher elsewhere, so this was before the internet. Right. And so I studied with her for 4 years, and she used primarily the Suzuki method, which I generally have issues with, but it sort of has an interesting tie-in to the type of music I focus on now, which we might touch on later on. But she moved out of the area. I joined the pre-college program at the University of Michigan, worked with several teachers there. I mean, I was composing basically from the beginning of my lessons and sort of making up things and putting them on cassette tapes. And,
okay.
So
hold up a second. That's very unusual in classical music and everything. So was it mainly classical music that you were playing in the beginning, or was it kind of a mix?
It was almost entirely classical. I mean, the Suzuki repertoire is very heavily sort of Baroque and galant, and then I was making up little things that vaguely resembled that. And it never occurred to me that that wasn't normal for a classical pianist to not write their own things. I mean, I wasn't physically writing it out, but I'd sort of put it on cassette tape. And actually, my very first recital, I played Mary Had a Little Lamb and my own little piece because we didn't have time to learn London Bridge, full disclosure. And so I got that bug, I liked the attention I got. And so I kept composing basically on and off from there.
Well, what did your teacher think about your composing and your pieces that you wrote?
Oh, she absolutely encouraged it. I mean, she was very happy to encourage me to write, and so it was sort of, I don't think anyone else in the studio was very much into that. Maybe one or two other kids would play something of their own at a studio recital.
Yeah.
So it was not like a widespread thing. Some teachers are really good about getting all of their students to do a little bit of composition activities, but that wasn't really her bag.
Right.
It tends to be the teachers who have more training as composers.
And you won competitions, right? I mean, you were winning piano competitions, and you even won music theory awards. And can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so I won a couple local things, sort of district winner at the guild auditions, which is just like a thing that it's an adjudicated thing. And then if you sort of hit a benchmark of a certain number of pieces that you present and you score above a certain cutoff, you're declared, you can be a local winner, district winner. Right. There's a bigger program where you could be a national winner. I'm not sure anyone in my studio ever really did that, but won a couple of things. I hit the state semifinals in the MTNA feeder competition several times, and got to do some adjudicated performances there. I won Music Theory and Piano Literature Awards at Interlochen. So I was the All-State Camp Yellow Sox, if any of you Interlochen people know the color coding system. So I went there 3 years in a row, absolutely loved it. I picked up a couple awards there.
Well, can I ask you about the theory? Now, when you were composing, I want to know what kind of thought process you were going through. Did you have theory when you were composing, or was it just a natural thing for you?
When I was young, it was definitely more natural. Actually, when I entered the pre-college program at Michigan, now that program is very heavy on the theory. They had said that I was a couple years behind in the theory knowledge that they would have expected me to have, or like, knowing things like scales and arpeggios. I was behind on that stuff, compared to where the class where they would want to place me. And I had to study privately before I could join the group class that they would have in addition to the lessons where you do like the duets and the theory stuff. And that program is very big on theory, which I think is great. I mean, that really prepared me for all the stuff I did in college and grad school. And so, when I was younger and in my first few years before entering the pre-college program, I really got very little overt theory. Right. But I find I definitely tend to think kind of grammatically in general. Like I really enjoy foreign languages. So I think the grammar side of the tonal language, was something that I sort
made
of got.
Sense. Yeah, it made sense for you.
Yeah.
Did you play a lot of music? I mean, some people I've asked, some composers or improvisers, they don't think too much, but when I ask them how much music did you play, they play a lot of music. So did you play a lot of music growing up? I mean, from the age of 5 to pre-college, how much music were you playing?
I don't think I was really raised in a very repertoire-rich environment necessarily. Now, it wasn't the exam culture where you do only 3 pieces a year, which I tend to go off students
that's
who
Singapore.
were in that. Yeah,
that's right here.
And Canada too, and the UK, and just a lot of places like that. Yeah, but I find I was probably spending more time noodling around on my own than practicing my repertoire, and my parents didn't know the difference. So I was not necessarily stopped, and I could sort of get through my repertoire enough that I don't think my teachers knew how much I was spending time noodling and not practicing my repertoire. So I'd say it was somewhere in the middle. I was playing stuff that wasn't necessarily what I was supposed to be learning. So it wasn't like the 3 pieces a year. Now in high school, I think I got busy and it kind of turned into that. But I had sort of a decently repertoire-rich upbringing then. Now, I'll say the thing I was missing was post-tonal music. I mean, I think I got some Bartok late in high school. My brain melted.
Okay, now tell me about college. So what did you major in? And tell me what you learned there.
So I went to the University of Michigan, go Blue. It was about 20 minutes from where I grew up. I mean, we're very much a Michigan family. My parents had attended the branch campus in Dearborn, and my dad had gotten a master's in Ann Arbor. So I think I would have been disowned if I had gone anywhere else, but Michigan actually had everything I needed and wanted, and so it really turned out well. And so I majored in music theory, and I also took significant coursework in composition. So I also studied piano there with Louis Nagel, who, bless him, he was exactly what I needed at the time, and I think he tends to like the more scholarly types.
What do you mean that he was exactly what you needed?
Well, I was getting my technique rehabilitated by Michelle Cooker, with whom I started studying actually right when I graduated out of the pre-college program. Because when I graduated from there, of course, I needed to switch. And so my teacher there recommended Michelle. And so she was rebuilding my technique from the ground up. Now, Dr. Nagel didn't mess with that. He focused more on the repertoire and kind of the coaching side. And so, they're 2 of the most opposite people on the planet, but for that purpose, they worked really well together. So it was great. And Dr. Nagel likes the theorists, composers, musicologists, or the real thinker types among the piano majors. So it was a really good mix in the studio. You'd have DMA pianists who were putting together lecture recitals. You had musicologists, composers, me. And so, and he really treated me like another piano major, which I really appreciated. And so it was a really good experience getting to work with him. And then I studied composition with Bright Cheng for 4 semesters, which was just barrels of fun. He is hilarious. And he was also someone I really benefited from working with. Of course, the music theory curriculum, you're taking classes with different people So I got to study with most of the faculty there. I really enjoyed my counterpoint class with Kevin Corson, who's also a valued member of the Partimento community.
Right.
And I pretty much consider him as much of a composition teacher as any of the other composition teachers I've had.
Yep.
And I worked with Wayne Petty and Karen Fournier, she is just wonderful. Allie Gosman as well. Ramon Satiendra, who is hilarious and so much fun. And Jim DePogny for my freshman year course. I mean, there's just so many fantastic professors there. Yep. It's a big theory department given the size of the school overall, so you really get to explore a lot, which I think is a great thing about Michigan, and it's just such a big, friendly environment.
You also studied basso continuo, right, in your undergrad?
I did, yes. I took a semester with Ed Parmentier, he's since retired, but again, he's hilarious, so intense, so fun. I don't think I knew what I was getting into. He had me just audition on his office harpsichord, and I think I had just started picking up the B-flat minor prelude and fugue from book 1 at the time, because my high school piano teacher wouldn't let me play it, and Dr. Nagel did, and so it wasn't all that secure yet. I sort of bumbled through it on his harpsichord, and he took me on. And so one of his methods would be to have all 4 of us sort of there, and we'd sort of switch off at the harpsichord. He'd put on a cassette tape of the St. Matthew Passion at Baroque pitch and then make us play along.
And so sounded like an amazing experience. You then advanced your studies in music theory with a master's at Indiana University. Could you tell me about that?
Well, during my undergrad, I had this theory and composition focus, and my goal, I think, was to become the next Nadia Boulanger and teach composers, and right. Especially in the pre-college sphere, because I found there wasn't a lot of that in pre-college for me. My teachers would sort of encourage me as they could, but it wasn't a regular thing. And so then, I started applying to graduate programs for theory and composition, and I actually got into some schools for composition. I got into Manus as a dual major, which I don't know how a dual master's was necessarily going to happen with 24 hours in a day, but I really like Manus. Yeah. Indiana just happened to come through. They're really generous with their fellowships for theorists because they just need all of us to teach the classes. Because it's such a large school, and yep. You get that feeling when you step onto the campus that you're home, and I think IU gave me that feeling after I had spent 22 years in Michigan, and I kind of knew I needed to be somewhere else. Right. And Michigan will also always be home, literally. But IU gave me that feeling that I was home. And it also has a very large department, so you don't need to have the slightest idea what your interests are. You'll find someone who can jump in and work with you in those areas just because of the department size. So I got there, really enjoyed teaching theory, and I was still learning solo repertoire on my own, and I did composition minors, also at the master's and doctoral level, and really enjoying everything and giving some conference talks, and I was really looking into sonata theory as kind of an area. And then I started my doctoral coursework, and I quite accidentally got sucked into collaborative piano, which was not a department there at the time. It very recently has become one. They've actually built a collab department.
And what is a collaborative department, or collaborative music, collaborative piano?
So it's basically a politically correct term for piano accompanying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And
why does it need a politically correct term?
Well, because some people have an issue with the word accompanist.
Oh. Really? Okay.
I have a lot of opinions about that. I think that, if people are fighting over that, they could be practicing. So it seems silly to say that at the school with Martin Katz, the best vocal collab department in the nation, probably. Right. I didn't fully grasp that collaborative piano was its own thing and something I might be interested in until I was in grad school at a school that did not have a department at the time. But I started advertising, freelance accompanying just as a way to keep making music, and I discovered that I absolutely loved it, and that a lot of my facility with tonal music really helped me get around the vocal repertoire quickly, because the singers aren't singing intimate.
Yep.
They're singing mostly tonal repertoire, especially these young singers, these like non-majors that I was working with more regularly, and so I discovered I had a knack for it. The singers appreciated my ability to coach, because coaching singers is a lot like teaching oral skills. And so I really got into it, and so I'm in doctoral coursework, and I'm giving all these conference talks, and I'm thinking I'm going to do sonata theory and all this stuff. And then right about a month before the end of my coursework in 2013, I got contacted by a mutual friend who said, my friend Amy has signed up to be a violinist on a cruise ship with a piano duo, and her pianist just backed out, and I think you would get along, and she needs to get back to Holland, America in about 5 days, and can you talk to her about possibly doing this? And I was on my way to North Carolina for a conference.
and you took the job.
I did. We were hashing it out, over conference dinner and in between papers and sessions and stuff. And I really sort of took it on a whim. And she was not someone I'd ever worked with. But I decided, what am I doing right after coursework? This looks fun. And Spain and Italy were two of the countries on the itinerary. And I was like, when else am I going to get to go see the motherland?
Right.
And so we took it, and so I learned 250 odd pieces that summer, and a lot of it is sort of salon music, but yeah, we did Handel sonatas, we did Beethoven Spring, did a couple Mozart sonatas. So being able to get around tonal music quickly was really an advantage there, because... Was
that sight reading, or did you prepare 200 pieces quickly?
Well, it was a mix, because they had asked us to prepare about that much, but it wasn't like they checked up on it,
Yep.
And once we got on the ship, we sort of modified our expectations for what would fit for, I had this idea that they wouldn't want anything in minor keys because it all had to be very light and fluffy, which ended up not being the case. So we threw in the Vitali Chacon, the one that's not actually Vitali.
Yep.
But so we threw in some stuff, and we'd get bored, and I'd download stuff on the internet, and we'd sight read it.
Yep.
And especially if people came in and requested things, and I was able to find them in port, because you go into port and all you want to do is find Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that's incredible. So did that change your career in any way? Did that influence your direction?
Absolutely. I mean, it put the collaborative piano bug in me. For real, kind of helped me prove to myself that, okay, this is something I have an aptitude for and that I really love. And so, I came back to Bloomington, and I was doing a ton of freelancing, mostly with the voice majors. And then, Wolfgang Brundle, who's a voice professor there from Bavaria, very, very German, Wagnerian. And he sort of adopted me into his studio. And so, half of this was probably because his dog's like me, and I am like a total Disney princess with any animals, and so I would be petting his dogs all the time. And the voice teachers, they love bringing their dogs in. I think that's half of why they adopted me, but also because I can stay with the singer and kind of adapt and coach and sort of sight read my way through stuff, even if it's a Handel Rage aria and it's too fast to sight read, I can just sort of take the bass and make a partimento out of it, and then it's usually enough to support them, and the singer may or may not sort of know what's going on, but it's really, it was really helpful. That skill set that I developed really translated well to working with classical singers, and so I've worked with almost every voice professor at IU. Until I moved away, and they have some new faculty now, but almost everyone who was there at the time I've worked with. And so I've really loved that, and private teaching as well. I really enjoy kind of running my own studio, and especially teaching online. I've absolutely loved it. Don't have to commute.
Yeah.
I can connect with students all over the world, even if the time zones are a little funky. But I've loved it.
And you said before that we started the program, you mentioned that music theory is very popular online. And I want to dive a little deeper into this topic of music theory. Now, are you also doing your PhD right now in music theory? Is that right?
Yeah, so I've achieved PhD candidacy at IU. And so then you sort of have your time to do your dissertation and all that stuff. And I've been just very busy kind of private teaching. And we actually moved to Cleveland because my fiance had a job opportunity up here. And this was fall 2019. And so we've spent the whole pandemic up here, which has been kind of good. I think I would rather spend the pandemic in a larger suburban area. As much as I love Bloomington, I mean, we were just there about a week and a half ago, and I miss it desperately. Did not miss having a cicada in my hair.
Well, can I ask you, so you're really diving into music theory. Now, music theory for me, I'm not an expert, but I realize there are many camps. It's very vast. There are many perspectives in music theory. What appeals to you in this wide field of music theory?
I think the biggest appeal for me is making it easier for students to perform and compose the literature that they love. Especially in teaching tonal composition, using the historical approaches that are, being unearthed and being more widely studied these days, I think is especially effective for those who want to write teaching music that's stylistically authentic, which I found is something that pedagogical composers struggle with. I've seen a lot of these collections that are like pieces in the style of so-and-so, or, the first example of that I think would be Fritz Kreisler and some of his violin pieces in the style of various people. But more recently, just these piano compositions for student pianists, kind of in the romantic style, especially because it's sort of harder to find stuff at kids' levels in that style. And I think that the insights we can gain from partimento study and from schema theory and just all this stuff that we're unearthing today, I think that's hugely useful for that. And actually, several of the students who have come to me for tonal composition studies have come to me due to an interest in writing and teaching music. And so that's something I've been doing for my adult piano students, because there's not enough literature for adult piano students. It's not like, Kitty Waltz or Banana Popsicle.
When did you discover partimento and schema?
I would say about 2014-ish. I should say it was sort of in pieces that I discovered these things, because when I started my master's, you'd have to take this readings class that would be a survey of all these approaches, and schema theory did come up a bit in there, in 2009. But I think that class was just so chock full of different approaches that I didn't quite wrap my head around it yet, because there was just so much going on in that class. And so it didn't really register in my head as much until, and then I sort of came off the ships in 2014, and then I started preparing for exams and stuff, and then I became more aware of it, and Giorgio's book had come out, and so I started getting more into this, and I would say, this, and then I started thinking, I am drinking the Kool-Aid, like, I am really into this. I think this is the wave of the future for how we teach theory and tonal composition. And so that's when I really sort of got into it. And it's sort of, and I'm just so happy that all this literature is coming out now, like Joe Beiserman's book, which is something I've dreamed of having. All those textbooks you feel you want to write and you don't have time to.
Now, you studied a lot of theory. You're very good at theory. And did you feel like you needed to integrate this information, or were there older concepts that you don't use as much as before?
Well, that's an interesting question, and something I've been kind of thinking about, because I think I came around to internalizing pretty much everything that partimento aims to teach, but just using different terminology. Thing like schemata would be taught to us as sort of chunks of 4-part voice leading in my freshman theory course. They were called idioms. Great. Things like that. Now I'm sitting at the piano here. So
Yeah,
things
please.
like the mi fa sol would be like, you would be taught to sort of plug those things into your part writing. Now, once I got into partimento and schemato, I'm like, there's such easier ways to teach this stuff. But it was approached sort of in a roundabout way. And I think I internalized some of these licks because I had been sort of immersed in the Suzuki repertoire, which is all Baroque and Galant, or at least it was at the time. They've sort of diversified it a little since then. But I learned these licks by sort of being around them.
Okay, so you said idioms and other terms. I believe like tonal patterns, that's, I think in Schenker, they have that as well. There's Satzmodell, right? That's the German schema.
Oh, yeah.
Now, okay, let's really get into the pedagogy here. How do you teach partimento and schema?
So I really love using the Eiserman book. It's very approachable for someone who has the fundamentals in place. So before I'll start them off, I'll make sure they have the fundamentals. To check the fundamentals, I like a book called Practical Theory by Sandy Feldstein. It's an old book, but it does the job of just making sure they know their scales and key signatures. And so if they breeze through that, then I say, okay, and they're off to Eiserman Chapter 1, and they're just filling in. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to look in the book, but he literally just takes, he'll take a scale, ascending and descending, and say, okay, fill in the thirds above. And then he's zoomed really far out in these skeletal structures that they will be learning. So we do that. Now, I have also had students who, if they have some experience and they're already composing, we'll go in and so I'll actually put them straight into Yertingen and say, here are these schemata that he's outlining, and maybe if they've included one or two in a piece and maybe it wasn't fleshed out quite right, we'll actually go into the pieces and sort of experiment with the different schema variants as they're a little more stylistically idiomatic. So it depends on the level of experience the student has. I tend to work with a fair number of students who have sort of limited piano experience or limited musical experience, and we stick pretty close to the Eiserman in that case. So we really make it kind of a heavily written approach if they don't really have the chops yet to realize stuff at the piano. Now, good pianists, we'll start going in and realizing stuff. I love the really short Mattei partimenti because they're like maybe 8 bars. So he's got, if you go on the IMS LP, there's like Il Piccolo Basso, and they have these cadenze, which is just these sort of short ones, and then they go into a longer partimento. I mean, my pipe dream is that the cadenze will just be collected in their own volume, and then we can sort of throw those at kids. And they're very interesting.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a critical edition coming out very soon. That'll be typeset, because I hate manuscript copies way more than someone who studies historical composition should.
Yep.
So maybe just my collaborative pianist upbringing, and the one time I had to read a handwritten transposition of a Handel aria, like playing for a new-to-me professor. And so I don't really like reading from handwritten copies, but that will be coming out very soon.
Can you tell me, what advice and tips do you have for teachers who work with very young children?
Well, I'll say that I actually prefer to work with older kids, teens, adults. So I tend to stick to, at IU, it was about 13 and up when I was teaching on a freelance basis. For online students, I tend to say about 10 and up. And, if a student comes to me and they're very advanced and they're a little younger, then I'll audition them. Generally, I think little kids could probably use less screen time. But yeah, I'll say that now I have been certified in the Tales of a Musical Journey approach, which does focus on young kids. And I think one of the focuses that program has is really on great technique, but also something that I really agree with and that I endorse and that kids don't get enough of is just listening to a lot of the great music from the common practice period. And so when I worked with Irina Gorin to get certified in that. She really emphasized that, like listening projects being given to the families, kind of singing and dancing along just kind of for fun, really like sort of putting them in an immersion program. But it's just fun, like they're just listening to great music at home.
And what is that? That's Tales of a Musical Journey.
Yes.
Okay. And is that a book that people can buy?
Yes, it's a book series. So irinagorin.com. So I'll spell her name out. IRINAGORIN.
Great. I'll put that link in the show notes as well.
Yeah. And she came from the Ukraine and pioneered this method series that really teaches beautiful sound production in the Russian tradition for today's students. Now, I think it does take a certain type of family who's really willing to support the child and buy in and kind of do the physical manipulation to make sure the technique is being developed in a really healthy way. I'll say it's not for every family, not for the family that's just going to drop off both their kids at a multi-teacher studio and sort of forget about the lesson. But one of the things I really love about Irina's approach is how she emphasizes that the kids should be listening to great music all the time. And I think that goes a long way in sort of immersing them in the language, because that was what the kids at the boarding schools and the conservatories were getting, because they were working every day and hearing that stuff every day. I think kids these days, I'm going to sound like an old curmudgeon. As kids these days aren't listening to enough music. They're like playing video games all the time.
Yeah.
So I find that the kids who become successful musicians today, they were hearing music every day, whether it was because mom was a piano teacher, wouldn't let them slack off on practice, or because, the parents just really enjoyed listening to a lot of music. I mean, I know of a couple of girls who, both of them were accepted to Juilliard, and they said, oh, Dad would play Beethoven sonatas all the time at the dinner table because he just really liked them.
I have a question that just came to mind. You're a pianist, and I want to just get your opinion. What do you think of technical exercises like Czerny, Hanon, and these sorts of things? What's your opinion on those?
I think Hanon is a waste of time. He was an organist, and we don't have proof that he had training on the piano specifically. Of course, organ technique is very different from piano technique. In general, the actions are very light compared to the piano. So, that's not something that I would recommend for piano students. Tracker organs, of course, would be a little different. And so I would not be doing that. I would stick to scales and arpeggios. Czerny, okay. I mean, I don't think it'll do any harm, but I also think you could drop the needle on practically any sonata by Mozart, Haydn, or Beethoven and get a more interesting musical experience.
It's real music, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right.
And Czerny wrote those exercises as a way around Beethoven's music. So in that case, if the difficulty level is near the same or the same, I just go right to the source and get to immerse yourself in Beethoven's sonatas, which is, is always a worthwhile way to spend your day. And I teach a lot of adults who just don't have that kind of time to do separate exercises. So if I can make exercises out of their repertoire, that's what I'll do, because then they're making more efficient use out of their practice time. But I do scales, arpeggios, cadence, progressions, this. I have them so they can develop that muscle memory.
What's your opinion on teaching the rule of the octave? Do you want the student to take the whole thing at once? Do you like to break it up? What's your opinion?
So that depends on the student. I know Eiserman breaks it up. I think that works for most students. If I have a student who's really wanting to jump into the partimenti right away, I'll sort of throw them into the fire. Certain students like being thrown into the fire and certain students don't. So I pace it kind of depending on the sense I get from that student. I think if it's just a garden variety piano student who's not really looking to compose or improvise their own stuff, then, I may kind of hang back on doing that. For being someone who's so into theory myself, I actually don't really throw my specifically piano students into a ton of theory, but I do integrate it into the repertoire they're learning. So if they're learning a piece where the rule of the octave is sort of very obviously fleshed out, I'll say, here's this thing. You might see this a lot in the literature. And so it connects immediately to their repertoire.
And which collections of Partimenti do you like to use? You mentioned Mattei, and you mentioned the Iserman book. Any particular composers or Partimento people that you like? Any collections?
Yeah, I mean, I like the Fenaroli. It's just good stuff. It's also nicely typeset in the new versions that are coming out. So Fenaroli frequently shows up. And then, I have just piles of other Partimenti, and I have just the whole folder. So partimenti.org is just a fantastic resource for all this stuff for people who have not explored that site yet. So I have, I pretty much backed up that entire collection on my iPad. So I just pull stuff out sort of as the students' needs dictate, but I find that Fenaroli and Mattei tend to be the two that I sort of zero in on the most. Because I think Fenaroli's very approachable. He has all these figured ones. And so a lot of times what I'll do with a student is we'll sort of color code. So I go on Zoom and they have the annotation feature, which I absolutely love. And so we'll find the base patterns. I'll color code the different patterns. And especially as they overlap, that's a good way to show that. And then say, okay, this is how you sort of plot out what your melodic line could be. And so I like the more attractively typeset versions for that. And then, there's some good sources in. Actually, I found a Bach example of all things. So I'm a church pianist as well. He's got this wacky little piece in the Miscellaneous Pieces album. It's a prelude and partita on the third tone. So it's got a modal label. Wild. And the last movement has parts that are simply a bass. And it's this friendly little Romanesca. And you just sort of like, now Henley has the saddest attempt at a realization on there. And so, we don't use that. Don't use that at my church gig either. But if I find random pieces like that by composers that my students will recognize, I love to pull those out. I know Kevin had us doing a little solfeggio in our counterpoint class, and I can't even tell you where it's from, but I could probably still play it. And he had us do this sort of long-term project where we fleshed it out in eighth notes and then 16ths, and then we had to do three voices. So I'll play the little thing. Yeah. It's very cute. So it's like. Repeats. And
great.
Yeah, just I don't even know where he found it, but and I'm not sure I knew at the time that what we were doing was solfeggio, but fleshed it out and did it in three voices, and it was successful. And so if I find things like that from composers that are famous to my students, then I think that's meaningful for them, although I also hope they discover a composer they wouldn't have known otherwise. So people like Durante, the only people I find who tend to know him, other than people in our kind of world, are the young singers who, you go to the Yellow Bible, which is the Schirmer 24 Italian songs and arias, and so two of his solfeggi somehow ended up in there. And of course those hyper-romantic realizations, but you can't get away from them because everybody has that book.
Yeah. I'm jumping around here. You wrote and presented a paper, Form and Deformation in Two Late Romantic Italian Piano Concerti. You featured two Italian composers. So tell me a little bit about them. Now, this is 2013, right? It was before you learned about Partimento. I'm very interested in these Italian composers.
Yeah, so basically, I had this grand plan of I actually, for a while, I had sort of been interested in these underplayed and sort of unrecognized romantic piano concerti. I think as a composer, I was wrestling with a couple of them. I mean, my unfinished works folder is just embarrassingly large, but I was really interested in the piano concerto in particular. And so I'd stumbled upon Scambatti's I don't even remember how, but it's Brahmsian in scope. It's just this giant thing in G minor. And he was a virtuoso pianist. He was from, I believe, Rome, and, he sort of gone through the conservatory system there. He died in like 1914. I only remember that because that was when my grandmother was born. And so he's one of these sort of late romantic types. And then Giuseppe Martucci was from sort of similar area, closer to Naples. And I just thought his B-flat minor piano concerto would be an interesting foil. Just to see what they did with the sonata form, and I used Hepikoski and Darcy analytical framework for that. Just because, back in that time, late 19th century, there's all this opera. Everything is opera, and people sort of forget about the instrumental work that was being written in Italy at that time. So I just thought it would be interesting. And the paper originated as a final paper for a seminar at IU I was taking with Blair Johnston on post-romantic music. And so I sort of wrote that out of necessity because it was a coursework requirement. And then he said, hey, this would be a cool paper because of a couple pieces that people don't know. And it was really well received. I mean, people were coming up and asking where they could get the score of the Scambati G minor piano concerto. And it's on IMSLP. It's not a great copy, but it's there. Yeah, you can grab it. And so really, it was more like people were just interested in the piece than about what I had to say regarding the sonata form.
Looking back now that you've been introduced to Parlamento, do those pieces, that's a 19th century piece, but do you find that there's schema and all that Parlamento, all that language in there?
I mean, I think you can find that in a lot of the 19th century and late 20th century repertoire. I mean, I'm brushing up on La Boheme because I have a collaborative piano student who's been asked to be a rehearsal pianist for La Boheme, and Act 1, clear as day, I heard a printer. Like, what? Sort of, it's probably the closest thing to an overture because you don't have the straight up overture so much in Puccini. And so I'm listening to it. I think I'm going out and collecting butterfly eggs because I raised monarchs in the summers, and I heard that.
I read that.
All right, yeah, that's, I think we all need to have a weird hobby. And so that's mine, and then I'll just have my iPod going and listening to things I need to be learning, and so, I need to be
that's very smart, actually.
Yeah.
It's good to have something like that.
Yeah, so I this printer just popped out at me in Puccini, and I've heard them in Rachmaninoff. I mean, I'd have to dig up sort of where, because, they just sort of pop out at you as you're listening. I think I found a quiescenza, and I had to record the orchestral part of the first movement of the Scriabin piano concerto, because this poor kid in our area, his concert got canceled, and so it was turned into a 2-piano streaming event. And I recorded that for him and said, okay, well, the Beethoven Spring Sonata no longer has the scariest quiescenza in the literature.
Wait, which quiescenza are you referring to?
The one where you have to play the scale, and then if you crack even a single note, the whole world hears it. So,
which piano sonata is that? I'm gonna look at it.
Well, it's the Beethoven Spring Sonata. It's the violin sonata, actually. Where we have. Something like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I joked that was the scariest crescendo in the literature. And then the violin is doing a whole lot of nothing, although they alternate. So she's going, and then. And although I shouldn't really say that because she gets the scale before I do.
Yep.
She's just not jumping around with the opposite hand while she's doing that. So.
Could you reference more schema in the literature? Because I just love hearing more and more occurrences in the repertoire because I love to learn about them. Is there any that you like that you've found in the wild?
Yeah, there's a couple around. I'm looking to see if I still have the Scriabin up in Fourscore, because that was just kind of a wild one for me to find because you don't expect.
Yeah, Scriabin, right?
That old. Yeah. Well, someday you don't. But it makes sense because these people were all studying out of the same sort of tradition, and And so it's not like, you learn in your music history classes that there's these different eras, and we're sort of learned to box them into separate categories.
Right.
And that's really not true. So it makes sense, unless you sort of had the undergraduate sense of, oh, these are all very different eras. They all existed in a vacuum, which they definitely did not. So there's your cue. And then, so he kind of establishes it in the solo part here. The orchestral part goes, after it sort of establishes the one, you go. So he substitutes that out. But there is the scale degree 6 in there that you need. And then maybe I should say first, the quiescenza in F sharp minor would be like something like the ending there's an opening type. So that's your skeleton, and so Scriabin sort of, he's landed in the key. This is the very last page, and so probably not even 10 measures until the end. And so he establishes it, then he goes. So instead of, you would sort of think a 6/4, he makes it kind of this sort of 4/2 that's kind of funky. So. He's also doing a canon of kind of the opening theme, and then he gives you your dominance. So it gets in there. It's just he's modified it as these very knowledgeable composers can do once they've sort of internalized things.
Can you play that Scriabin thing as a whole?
Yeah, so he's on a tonic pedal because that's what you do. So then
wow.
So there is the solo part layered over that. This sounds a little bare, being the orchestra part, because this is, he's bouncing around in octaves, as you do. Yeah, so once composers had, they got past the point where they were being trained, they could manipulate these in ways that would sort of disguise them. And so Scriabin, this is a youngish piece by Scriabin, but he was able to do that, and I just thought it was very interesting that I noticed this in a fairly late work. I don't remember the year this was composed, but it was then having to put the tracks together. I think I found the scariest quiescenza to play in the literature, although I welcome other nominations, I guess.
Nicole, before we end, I want to ask you, have you seen a change in interest in Partimento? You started discovering this in 2014. Have you seen an uptick in interest? Have any of your music theory peers asked you about it? Say, hey, what's going on here with this whole Partimento schema thing?
Yeah, I've definitely seen some interest. A couple of my colleagues at IU have really done well in advancing their scholarship on schema. A couple guys actually got an award from the SMT, just sort of the National Music Theory Organization. So Paul Sherrill and Matthew Boyle, they did a paper on galant repetitive schemas, which I thought was very cool and so helpful for me as a vocal coach. And so they've really been making a name for themselves there. Nate Mitchell is another person who's been very successful in advancing some work on schemata and stuff like that. So it's been pretty popular. I don't know that I have people necessarily asking me about it who are specific to IU. I think now it's more widely around that people are sort of stumbling upon it on their own, which is great. And so I'm very excited to see that this is coming out. Where I do think, this will be the wave of the future in teaching kids as well. Now that my studio is basically fully online, I'm not really recruiting 5- and 6-year-olds, but I know people do specialize in working with that age group. And so, I mean, people like Alma Deutscher, we've seen that it can be very successful with younger kids, even if she is probably exceptional. But I think it's really promising.
Well, I mean, what can I say? It's been a real thrill to have you on the show, Nicole. And before we end, please tell my audience what you have in store for the rest of the year and how they can contact you for piano, Partimento, music theory. How can they reach out to you?
Absolutely. So far this year, actually this month is unusually busy with solo piano engagements. So I will be streaming a little concert for Sing for Hope, which is an organization I've done some streaming things with. It is a solo concert, which, I've been going on about being a collaborative pianist.
Yep.
But the solo engagement just sort of appeared. And so it'll be this Friday at 2:30 Eastern U.S. time. And so if you go to, I don't know if there's an easy way to get the URL to you, but it's, if you go to Sing for Hope and then you go to Open Arts, there should be, it's like singforhope.org, and then if you go to the Open Arts program, there should be a link there to hop on the Zoom. I'll have to get you the URL. Maybe you can insert that in some kind of way
in the show notes.
And then I'm actually playing for a private party tonight, and then I'll be doing a concert at a retirement home next week, and so it's another solo recital. And then the thing being a collaborative pianist is that a lot of my engagements tend to come at the last minute, so it's hard to predict sort of what my engagements will be. But I do have an artist website and a studio website that you can reach out on. So for lessons specifically, the studio website is sort of the quickest way. The artist website has info about performing engagements and the like, and it also has a thing where you can see some of my compositions and purchase them, like Venturing Beyond. That's my set for adult piano students in unusual keys.
I like your piano trio. I was listening to it on YouTube. It's very lovely.
Oh, thank you.
The C minor one, right? The C minor one?
Yes, it's the only piano trio that I have
very
composed.
Nice.
And so that was really enjoyable to write. It's gotten a few performances, very sort of romantic in character, I'll say. I think if left to my own devices, I'd probably continue writing in sort of an early romantic style.
Well, I want to ask you, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of modern, contemporary classical music. I mean, I have an open mind, but I struggle sometimes to enjoy very contemporary, I like someone like Elliott Carter. I like that sort of thing. You're a theorist, and you're also a composer. What do you see in the future for composition in the modern age?
Well, I think people are getting away from, you have to be super original or your music is not worthwhile, which unfortunately I was even prone to that as a young composer. I mean, I would take licks that I was learning from just the repertoire and I'd try to manipulate them so I could be original, but then, they weren't fleshed out quite right. And so I think people are realizing that the originality for its own sake is not really a great way to go in teaching young composers, because it places a burden on them when I think your language will develop naturally. You will develop your own voice with life experience and with continued musical experience. I think it should not be forced. And some programs will try to force it. And I'll say that at Michigan and IU, I had the good fortune to have instructors who encouraged me and so challenged me to write for different ensembles and with different parameters. But they weren't saying your work is terrible for not being original.
Is there a dismissiveness of tonal music, in quotes? I get the sense that there is a bit of, and I'm not part of that world, but people have told me that there's a bit of, this tonal music, it's been done before.
I think in certain circles there is, and I think it's improving, but I definitely got that sense even before college. I'd have a couple of people saying, well, this is the work of a theorist, not a composer. However, I didn't grasp that tonal composition, like for teaching music, could be a great avenue for me. And then when I started teaching adult students, that fell into my lap because I was saying, hey, I was seeing that there was really nothing for adult students. that, a lot of the music was sort of childish. And so I really found, it was 2013, I had been building a private studio in Bloomington and discovering there wasn't enough in unusual keys for my adult students, because a lot of them, they played another instrument or they just learned to read more quickly than kids do. And so I said, okay, I need a reading challenge for these adults, but still their technical development.
Is this venturing beyond your set of 20
Yes.
early intermediate piano solos in unusual keys, representing various 19th and 18th century genres?
Yeah, so they're serious sounding pieces for my adult students who, they're maybe sensitive to the idea of playing things that sound like they're written for little kids. And then I also took the opportunity to introduce them to various styles. I mean, I've got nocturne, minuet, I've got a Liebeslied, I've got a little album leaf, Berceuse, other sort of titles. I have a little fugetta in there to introduce them to, and say the little preludes and fugues of J.S. Bach. So that it is a little three-voice, and so they're getting into these genres, and then the music sounds serious. I mean, I'll tell you, because my fiance is on his morning run, and he can't make fun of me for saying this, but he played the Liebeslied in A at a wedding as one of the preludes. Friend of his sister got married, and no one knew it was a teaching piece, which is the whole point.
Right.
The thing is, he sort of pretends to get offended if I assign it to a student or play it myself, because, it's his piece now.
Well, I obviously have to buy it. I have one more question, Nicole. Can you recommend some easy piano pieces that are like two-voice pieces that don't sound like exercises, and they just sound like real music, just from the repertoire that you like to assign to students?
Well, yeah, I mean, my first, this is going to sound extremely basic, but go into the Anna Magdalena notebook, because those pieces are classic for a reason. Not all of them are Bach, but Bach clearly valued them as teaching pieces for Anna Magdalena. So that's definitely where I would go. And then there's some really interesting little pieces by the Russian composers that I learned about by working with Irina Gorin. So there's a guy named, and I'm just going to write his name down, Alexander Gedicki.
Okay.
Grew up in Russia despite his name. He wrote these very interesting little miniatures. Not all of them are in two voices, but I think he really pays attention to healthy technique development. And so he's really got some treasures there. Most of them are on my IMSLP. He's been dead for long enough. So really nice resource. A lot of other Russian composers that I would recommend that maybe people in this sphere wouldn't know about. So those might be people. I might have to sort of gather up a list and recommend some pieces. A lot of my venturing beyond pieces, I'll say they're not in two voices. Most are in three. I'd say my Berceuse in B is mostly in two voices. And so that could be something to approach. I mean, the Arioso in D sharp minor is also mostly in two voices, but it's a little bit more complex, also because of the key. So I have a few things in two voices, but it's not consistently so.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for that, for sharing that. And it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, Nicole. And I hope you come back soon, because this Partimento and schema and this new wave is really taking off. And we need great teachers like yourself to be visible. And I hope you'll come back. So thanks again for coming on the show. And I hope you had a good time. And please, my audience, go check out her website. I'll put all the links in the show notes. Nicole, it's been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.